Hello, 8th grade. How are you doing? We have a lot to cover today. I am giving my 8th graders the most amount of elements of close reading strategy to memorize and understand because you will be going to high school next year. They will expect you to not only be able to identify all of these elements of close reading strategy, but create examples of your own, and I want you to do that confidently. So I do not want to hear any complaining. We will continue to repeat these definitions until they are so ingrained in your brain they might as well be your middle name. Okay. So one thing that I want to review first, and I will do so quickly because I know many of you know this already as 8th graders, but I want to review point of view. So point of view is this: the perspective from which the story is told, or the eyes, or how a person views the world. Sorry if there's noises in the background. My cat is just running all over the place. So, at home learning. We understand what kind of point of view that we are in, either first, second, or third person, by looking at the pronouns or referring to somebody else without using their name. So if I were to say, Miss Mangrove is really tired, Miss Mangrove needs to go to sleep, which is sort of how I feel right now, I would be putting myself in the third person. But what you usually hear is somebody saying, I am very tired, I want to go to sleep. That is putting them in the first person. I will quickly go over my visuals that I use for my 6th and 7th graders so that you guys have a full understanding before we move on. But just to remember the exact definition of a pronoun, it is a word that takes the place of a noun, which is a person, place, or thing, but we expand that definition to person, place, thing, concept, or animal, because I do not think an animal is a thing. They are their own being. Okay? So, in terms of the visual representation of this information, who is telling the story is the question I am asking when I am asking what is the point of view. Okay? When they're in first person, like I said before, they are telling a story about themselves. So they would use pronouns like my, as you can see in this highlighted example, or I. And I wrote a little silly story to show the younger kids, but I'll show you too. It says, my name is Miss Mangrove and my story is full of ups and downs and clowns. Whoop. And ups and downs, literally, that's great. I have ghosts. And many, many towns. It all started when I was born, as most stories start. So the pronouns that I'm using here are I and me. And just to make for certain that you understand completely, here is my cue card of hints for first person point of view. It is a character that is telling a story they are in. The pronouns, like I said before, are I, me, and we. And the example is no one can jump rope higher than me. Or my sister and I read our books every night. That is first person point of view. Now, in third person point of view, I am still asking the question who is telling the story, but it's not the story that they are in, it's a story that the characters are in. So we are not completely in this story. We're just right above it. But I did put a little pivot inside of this text because they still know about the characters' feelings sometimes. They still know what's going to happen next in the story, even though the characters might not. So because they have that ultimate understanding at times, being in third person point of view, I put a little pivot because they're sort of in the story, but they're mostly out. My little alien person. So then here is the example that I have here. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who wanted more than anything else in the world to become a doctor. She didn't leave her dream up to luck or chance. This girl's name is Natalia, and this is her story. So the pronouns that I'm using here are she and her. The story is being told from this alien person. However, it is about other people. Okay? And then my cue cards for help you remember third person point of view is an author is telling a story they are not in. The pronouns are they, she, and he, and the examples are no one can jump rope higher than her, or Calvin and his sister read their books every night, and that is third person point of view. Now, let me make sure I can find my second person. I've got a couple of flashcards that we're going to review to make sure you understand those 6th and 7th grade close reading strategy elements before we go to our 8th grade ones. Here we go. So point of view, I've described now the first person and I've also described the third person. Notice the visuals that I chose to have here. So I've got a guy who has a book because they are the author. Also, they are writing about themselves. The arrow is being pointed to themselves because they are writing the book they are in. In third person, I have the author pointing to another person because it's about this person, but the author is distant and over here. They are writing a story about a story they are not in. Now, second person point of view, think about a letter, okay? I'm sorry if you hear my cat's toy. I might take it away from her in a second. So, Moxie. Okay. So, second person point of view is like when you're saying, thank you, Grandma, for sending me the birthday presents that I really wanted. You're making a connection to another person, and you would say something like, you are the best grandma ever. You are going to get your own great birthday present this year. So you're talking to someone else. It's you. Okay, and that connection is being represented by the hands. So also, second person is like, if I were to say, you are going to the store, after that, you are doing, like an example of this in literary terms is Claudia Rankine has a book called Citizen that is really good, and I recommend that you read. And the whole story uses the word you. Really, if we look at the subtext or the deeper meaning of the story, we know that the you is actually a collective you. The you is, she's saying, you go to the store, and especially right now, right, where with all this COVID stuff happening, you would say, you go to the store and you make sure that you are 6 feet away from the person next to you. Then it's almost like a direction. So it's like, then you go to the counter and you make sure that the person that they have gloves on their hands. After you get home, you immediately put on hand sanitizer and you wash your hands. These are things that you're communicating more feeling through second person point of view, okay? Because you're using you as a way to acknowledge all of us, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, I will make sure that I put a link on a sample of Claudia Rankine's book, because I think that's a really important book to read, and you guys are definitely old enough to be able to understand it on that deeper level. So I will do that later. Okay, so that's point of view. Now, let's do some quick review of the concepts that we've previously discussed, and then we're going to deep dive into the more complex elements of close reading strategy. So first is visualizing. So when we're visualizing something, we are creating an image of the story in your mind. And this is something that you would find in that first read. Let me just make sure I have my first read separated from my second read. I do. Great. So yes, you would, if the author is a good author, they would use all 5 of their senses to make sure that we have detailed imagery in the story, and it would be easier for the reader to visualize what is happening. So if the story is about the moon, we would see the moon in front of us, okay? Visualizing. Next is predictions. So what do you think is going to happen next? So do they go this way towards heartbreak? Or do they go this way towards love? And these symbols could mean a lot of things. It doesn't have to be about romance. It could also be like the breaking of a foundation that was unhealthy in the first place. So that could possibly be a positive path. This could be holding on to a duty that you previously had, like you felt obligated to have a certain position somewhere, something like that. These are different roads that the character could take. And when we ask about the prediction, we predict something before we read the end. So we don't predict something after we've already finished the story, because at that point we're just making inferences on what happened or connections that are based on prior knowledge in the text in front of us. However, these predictions matter because if you can predict in a novel, you can predict what might happen in the real world. We make text to world connections on purpose. We want to be able to read people and their traits and predict maybe where they may go next. And this is going to help us be more successful because the better you can read people, and believe me, you always have to work with people. Even my students that don't like to work with people and like to work by themselves, that's a very, very rare case where you get to truly work by yourself. You're always going to have to work with people in some capacity. And if you can predict people or characters like we're practicing to in ELA, then your ability and rise for success is going to be an easier climb. I promise. So, prediction. Inference. And I had said this before. And we always say this because I want this to be in your brain. Prior knowledge plus text is the inference. And I have my little brain to represent prior knowledge. I have a little book to represent the text. And I have them come together and make a little eye, which is the inference. It's just a symbol for what an inference might be. Okay? For an example, and I use this for my 7th graders as well, but I think that this is a good example. For example, if I were to have, a grandfather that was sick with a certain illness, and then in the story, a character, their grandfather is also sick with a certain illness, I have prior knowledge. But, of course, they have a different name, they have a different setting, they have a different background, all these things. And this text in front of me is not completely like my life, but because I have my own prior knowledge, and I see the text in front of me, I would put those two together and make a connection of, you know what, I think this may be, I could even have my own opinion of maybe they should do this to help the grandfather feel better. I noticed that happened in my life. Or maybe he has this specific illness, if it's not clear in the book, if a lot of the symptoms are the same, and you had your own knowledge of what it could be, you could maybe make a diagnosis. And where does that seem familiar in terms of fields where this would have real life practicality? This is a doctor's way of looking at things. Using your knowledge that you have, looking at the evidence in front of you and making that connection and making a diagnosis about maybe what a patient has. So this is something that also does not just live in the literary world. It lives way beyond it. So you need to get good at it, which is why we practice all the time. Okay, so that is the first read through. I know we had a little bit more, but those are the major elements of that first read. Now let's focus on the second read. Once we've got the general understanding of what's happening, we then dive deep into the characters on our second read. So the characters, we need to look at two things, the trait and the arc. So when we're looking at the trait, what we're really asking is, how does the character behave? And the reason why I have this image is because I'm saying, what are they saying? This is a speech bubble. So how are they talking? What are they actually saying when they are talking? What is their body language saying, right? Also, what are they thinking? Sometimes we read books where we know exactly what their thoughts are. Like in Children of Blood and Bone, we were able to know if Zelly was nervous or if she felt very brave in that moment. We were able to know those things because our narrator told us, but in third person point of view. Then we have arc. So what does the character journey look like? What does it feel like as well? We can also have a character arc that has a lot to do with the mood happening. So these are the two things that we look for when we are considering a character in literary analysis. Okay. Next is the plot. So plot is pretty simple. It's the sequence of events in a story. Yes, it's the beginning, it's the middle, and then it's the end. I do have sort of a not so perfect arc here, and I will let you know these arcs look pretty similar. Usually a character will also go through a certain climax and then have a resolve after, just like in a story. They will have a beginning, middle, and end. These are because the character follows along the story, or the story is based on the character's journey. They're similar for the reason that they are intertwined to make a story great. Okay? That's plot. Figurative language. So we've been over this before, but we've got simile, so it's comparing two different things using like or as. Hyperbole, an extreme exaggeration, like I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Onomatopoeia, the actual wording of a sound that's being made, so like boom or pow. We've also got idioms, like it's raining cats and dogs outside, a sequence of words that's put together through cultural context. I know that there's not actually cats and dogs outside, but I know through the sayings that have been passed down from generation to generation that what I'm really meaning is that it's raining very hard. Awesome alliteration. I have awesome before alliteration to emphasize that alliteration means the beginning of the word, the sound it makes, is repeated over and over, like Peter piped a pickled pepper. That is alliteration with the sound p. And then metaphor is the comparing between two different things by saying this is that. So she is a cheetah versus simile would say she is like a cheetah. She is so fast. Okay? All right. That's figurative language. And you guys should have a pretty good grasp on that, so I'm not worried about you there. Mood. What is the feeling you get while reading the story? So I have these little emojis because what we would do is we think about usually just a short passage is what the test asks you. Like if they were to just give you an example of something like, and I use this with my 7th graders too, but I think this is a good one of, she was sitting nervously biting her nails before the first day of school. So which of these do you think that most aligns with? Probably not that one. It doesn't seem she's surprised to go to school. Doesn't seem she's melancholy or sad. Doesn't seem she's frustrated. Doesn't really seem like she's happy about it, but I would say it seems like she's this person, a little bit anxious about it. So if there were to be a test question that were to say, this passage, she was biting her nails before the first day of school in the corner. That passage is most aligned with what mood? Surprised, sad, happy, or anxious? You would then pick D, anxious. Okay, so this is how it would come up in a test form. Now, when it has to do with mood in terms of practicality in real life, this is what the story is saying when you have a good grasp on vocabulary and you have a good grasp on being able to read in between the lines of what's happening. So sometimes the dialogue might say, for example, she was biting her nails before the first day of school, but the dialogue says, she says something out loud like, I'm ready to go. The dialogue, or on the surface of what's happening, might not be what's happening really deep within her emotions. So we need to be able to determine the real and true mood in order to understand the journey, understand the traits, understand the plot itself. This all comes down to also being able to determine the mood. Not just of the character, but of the story itself. Okay? The verbs, the adjectives, the descriptive words that are being used to tell the story from the author. Losing my voice. I gotta keep going. Okay, setting. I've got, of course, what's the temperature? What is the shrubbery? What does the house look like? What does the inside of the house look like? What do the stars look like if we are in the universe and we're not in this world anymore? Are we even in this world? Are we in this part? Are we in this part? The setting is where the story takes place. Also, the time period that the story takes place. This is the future. I would like for you to write a story about that. I might have that be a writing prompt soon of what do you think the future would look like in 2309. So, yeah, start to think about that because I think I'm going to make that an assignment. All of that is just a review. Now, let's talk about our deep diving content for 8th graders is that third read through in the third column of my close reading strategy notes that I gave you. It is personal implications, and these aren't complicated to understand. It's just I want to emphasize that by 8th grade you should be able to do these. Personal implications, or a text to self connection. So how does the text relate to you? How does the text not relate to you? What do you think about it in terms of if you were to be in that situation, if you were to be in that setting, if you were to have a relationship or a friendship with a character similar to the traits that the character has in the story? What would you do if you were in a really hard situation where you're in a case where you're predicting, is the story going to end up in this way or that way? Why did you make that prediction? Is there something about yourself that would want to go in one direction versus the other? These are things that we're thinking about when we make personal implications. Okay? Next, I do need my 8th graders to understand subtext, or the deeper meaning of the story. I was just talking about this by saying it's not just the dialogue of the story. It's about what the characters are thinking, about what the characters are feeling. It's about what beyond the characters are thinking and feeling. Maybe it's about the author. The author is putting their own voice in the story in some sense. The deeper meaning of the story is the story. I'm going to say that again. The deeper meaning of the story is the story. And that's why it's really important to do those multiple reads, because I don't even believe that you truly understand the story just by reading it once. Unless you have a lot of practice, which I implore you to do. Critical view. So, when we're thinking about something critically, we're thinking not just what we like about it. I think that's kind of an elementary school way of looking at things. Of like, if somebody were to say, what did you think about the story? Maybe your first instinct is to say what you like about it and what you don't like about it. What I like about it is this, what I don't like about it is this. No. A critical way is looking at the world from from many different perspectives. So it's not just a pro and con list, but it's also the gray area in between. It's what if I were to look at it from this direction? Maybe I put the story upside down in some sense. What I want you to think about a critical view of the story by looking at it from many different points of view, and maybe not the most obvious one. Maybe you think about the antagonist and you have more sympathy for them, and the antagonist is going against our protagonist. So if you were to have more sympathy for them and maybe you like their character journey a little bit more, you could look at this a little bit more critically and say, well, I don't really think that the antagonist was portrayed in a fair light. You could say something like that if you were to look at it critically. Real world application. which is simply making a text to world connection. And this was in our quiz, so congratulations to the people who got this right. This is a pretty simple concept. I'm going to read something in the text and I'm going to look around at the world around me and see what kind of connection I can make, which is just also another word for an inference. But I will say this, it's really important to be informed on the world around you so you can make a relevant and updated text to world connection. And that's what's going to really set you apart from other students when you go to high school and college and beyond. All right, part to whole. So this one I think is best represented visually. It helps me understand it more than the definition of itself, but I will read it. Where does the story fit in the context of the series, the genre, and the world? So how does this story fit in the larger context of how we live? Why do we need this story? Is really what I'm asking when I'm looking at the part to whole. And it's visually represented by these puzzle pieces because this would be the story and this would be how it fits in the larger part. So maybe this is the world, this is the literary genres, this is the critics, this is you and your friends reading the story. How does this puzzle piece fit with all the other pieces? Okay? And finally, this one seems like the easiest one, but I actually think that sometimes this one can be a little difficult. So, theme. This is reoccurring events, concepts, and ideas in a story. So, I gave a couple of examples of themes that are in novels that we read, like duty to family, that happened in Children of Blood and Bone, where Zelly felt a really strong duty to her family, specifically her father, by being a part of the fisherman trade that he had established for food and for all the resources that they were able to gain. And because that was their source of survival, she had a very strong duty to family that she battled with throughout the entire novel. We also have themes like redemption, themes like coming of age books, which are very popular for your age because you are coming of age. So it would be advised to read more books that are similar to your journey, your own character arc, if you will. Okay? That is theme. Okay, so I am going to do a very quick read through all of these. We're going to do a quick flashcard like little test, and I want you to watch this all the way through and test yourself and see if you can get all these right. I'm going to shuffle them up right now. I'm going to say the definition first, and then you're going to call out the headline right here like it's Jeopardy, okay? I'm going to do it fast too, so I want you guys to pause it if you need a second to think about it. What is the feeling you get while reading the story? Is the story's mood. Simile, metaphor, hyperbole, automatopoeia, awesome alliteration, and idioms are all examples of figurative language. The sequence of events in a story is called the story's plot. How does the character behave, and what does the character's journey look like? Oh my gosh, I said the word. Oh my goodness. I'll say it this way. How does the character behave is an example of the character blank trait, and then arc is the journey. Prior knowledge plus text in front of you is an inference. What do you think is going to happen next is a question we ask when we are trying to make a prediction. Create an image of the story in your mind is an example of visualizing. First, second, and third person are categories of what? Point of view. Reoccurring events, concepts, and ideas in a story are what? Or is, I should say, is theme. Where does the story fit in the context of the series, the genre, the world? Part 2 whole. Making a text-to-world connection is real-world application. Looking at the work from many different perspectives is the critical view. The deeper meaning of the story is also called the story's subtext. Text to self-connection is also called a personal implication. And where the story takes place is called the setting. That is all I have for you 8th graders. If you have any questions, please email me, of course. You are getting much better at turning assignments in on time, but it's good, not great. So I want it to be great. Any other reminders I can think of? I have been seriously, very genuinely proud of you. I want you to do better at the assignments in terms of time. Please stop turning them in late. If I said that twice, then I needed to say it twice. I guess my cat wants to say hi. Say bye to the 8th graders.